Tell us a little bit, like what inspires you and motivates you on a daily basis?
All right, looks like I'm on the end here, so I will start. My name's Tom Allen. I'm in the Coast Guard, been in the Coast Guard for 29 years, became the CFO this past summer. So the first thing you got to know about Coast Guard military officers and how we got here was what we do. So we in the Coast Guard kind of value those people that go from operations back into a specialty. So about 10 years into my career, I entered the financial management tract of the Coast Guard, a specialty, and since 2000 really, I've been moving back and forth between operational ashore positions and finance positions and a couple special assignments. So those prepared me to be the CFO, but I got to tell you, I am the person that relies on those people that you know very well, Mark Rose and Craig Bennett, who are the constant kind of CFO professionals that are over at the Coast Guard. I think the benefit that we see about that kind of dual career path, as we call it, is the ability for us to set policy and what we're going to do for the future, and then go out as operators and find out how does that affect what we're doing on the ground level. And sometimes that's really good, and sometimes it's I need to get back up to headquarters and fix some of this. So it's been great. Coming into the job, I've gotten to travel around. We've got a great finance center that services a couple of the components within the DHS, and I've got to learn a little bit about what they do and where they're going in the future. Certainly we're looking at FSMS and where we're going with that, and we're looking forward to October 20 to the success of that and how we're going to be moving forward. But I think the other thing we're starting to look at and we're starting to see as you kind of look towards that future is I really believe people are trying to understand how we're going to take limited dollars and apply them best across the department. And I think when you do that, we need an ability to do that from kind of an idea of looking at what is risk across the department, what is risk across the agency. Coast Guard will tell you has 11 missions, and when you talk about risk and you try to break that down to individual missions, that's very tough. But we think the new risk register and what we're doing with A123 is going to help to kind of mature that discussion on where we're going, because we think we need risk and strategy to really start driving our budgets of where we're going. So many times we react to what we need or what the next bright and shiny thing is. We think we need to get ahead of that with strategy. So when you do that, I will go to one more thing that I think the Finance Center is doing. They're starting to do things that say, hey, a lot of our analysts are out there and they're spending a lot of time doing redundant things just to bring data in so that they can start to compile that and look at that. What we want to do is use kind of that AI, that bot kind of analysis to really start looking at how can, when they show up to work, that analysis has all been put into a single place. We can get those smart people to look at that information, not compile that information, and then really start to advise our senior leadership teams on, hey, here's where we're spending money, here's where we could be spending money, here's what our strategy says, and here's how we integrate risk across that. So I think there's a lot of great things that are going on with the department that are going to help us get there. I think the main thing that's going to help us get there is the people that I'm looking at right now and how we respond to those changing things. Because I'll tell you, I've talked to some of our own people, and you talk about how do you integrate risk into strategy, and I think everyone kind of smiles and kicks the dirt and says, yeah, that's never going to happen, right? So I think we've got to start that individually in how we're going to do it, and I'm looking forward to being in the department and watch that come to fruition. Thanks.
Hey, good morning. So I'm Pat Rose. I'm the CFO for the TSA. So I've been that for nearly 5 years, and it's been a really rewarding, challenging assignment. So my background is I'm a career Air Force officer, so ran around with Chip back in the day, Alan Bloom, and Sam Grable, and some of those other folks who all ended up in DHS. So it's good to see us kind of end up in a common place. So the career in the military, taught me a couple different things in terms of development and people. And one of the things that we'd like to try to get to in DHS, and I think with the workforce development team, they're off to a good start, is just the development and the mentoring of our folks. In the military, you almost use the organization, right, as the foundation, as the mentor, right? You have some individuals who kind of mean a lot to you as you go through, but the institution itself is what drives everybody up to a higher level. And I think in DHS and with the work that Stacy's doing and Randall and those folks, or Burrell, I always get his name mixed up, we're putting that stuff in place to, drive each and every one of us up to a higher level so we could achieve and succeed. One of the things that motivates me and why I like doing what I'm doing, especially at TSA, is, TSA is a fairly new organization, like the department, so there's great opportunity to kind of make things better. So in terms of building a database, right? So when I first got there, we were managing $8 billion on spreadsheets. That's just like crazy. Why would you do that? And trust me, not every spreadsheet was the same. The spreadsheet in the program office didn't match the spreadsheet in the budget office. And within the budget office, they were all different. So we're building out a database that kind of helps solidify the program of record. So those type of things are really exciting to do. As we branch forward and we move into a new financial system, that also is going to be exciting. There's just so many talented people we have in our finance section who understand and have to develop workarounds for what we do to kind of keep the clean audit. And so hopefully as we move forward with the financial system, we'll be able to put those folks into better use by looking at controls and entity level controls versus trying to do the workarounds and everything that goes with it. So I want to thank you for being here and, like Chip said, taking your time out to come get smarter. That's our job as leaders. Your jobs as leaders and subordinates is to make yourself better, make yourself great, and make those around you better and greater at the same time. So thank you.
Good morning. My name is Mary Comans. I have 14 years with DHS. I started as a PMF 14 years ago, and it was great this morning to see my first boss, Andy Maynor, and then many of my teammates and peers across those 14 years as I've progressed and moved around to different positions within DHS, both at headquarters and with the component. Most recently, I've been with TSA, excuse me, FEMA.
Well, that's not a lie.
Yeah, that's not a lie. FEMA for the past 3 years. I started there as the deputy, served in the acting capacity through the terrible 2017 disaster season. Didn't run the finances into a ditch, and they kept me around and made me the permanent CFO. One of the things that motivates me is the mission. And one of the most exciting things about FEMA is whether you're in a line of business or you're in the frontline operations, everyone at FEMA views themselves as an operator and directly contributing to the mission and helping disaster survivors. Humbly, I think it's the most important mission within DHS, and it's just this camaraderie that when the siren goes off, people are ready to respond and to give up their time, their energy, their hours, their time away from their family to contribute to help disaster survivors. Where I see FEMA going in the future and where, as an agency, we're trying to drive forward is using and developing data analytics. So much of what we do today is trying to predict the future based off of the past, and we just really need to get ahead of the disaster response because our pace of business is through the roof, and that's just accelerates the need for change, and that puts a lot of pressure on the finance team to make sure that we're managing the resources properly, particularly because most of the disasters happen in the last quarter of the fiscal year, to make sure that we have the resources, both dollars and people, ready to respond when our nation needs us. So I look forward to the conversation this morning, and hopefully Pat gets all the hard questions.
Hello, my name's Tim Soltis. I have 0 years with DHS, but over 30 years in government. I was in DOD, the intelligence community, Department of Education. Now I'm over at OMB. So the consensus is, I think I've been across, I had audit roles, led audits, then I ran audit readiness in DOD, actually when it started, so getting audit ready, some of the stuff you guys were doing in DHS, kind of in the beginning of that, where DOD's still on that journey, so I could actually go back there and remember how it was. You know, the same things they're doing, but they're actually more serious along the way. Then went from audit, you know, trying to get audit ready, to a department that's been auditable for many years, and they would come and tell me, well, look at this, you know, look at us. And when I looked at them, I said, you know, I see my past in your future, meaning that you've got to a point you're auditable, but you've put processes together to get auditable. You're not innovating anymore, and you don't even know how you get the information anymore. You've created a process to prepare financial statements, not to produce data or to be able to answer questions. You can produce a statutory report, but you can't answer questions. So I think the reason I came to OMB is because I think that the time is ripe across the whole government. It's the same thing. I think everything you guys talked about, you know, every agency is at some place in a maturity model, you know, somewhere in there, but it's the same issues of people, process, technology, trying to get there. So I think the time, what we're trying to do is really drive the integration of the back office, you know, moving towards data-centric organization. As far as I'm concerned, the biggest transformational thing is going to be moving towards, you know, data-centric and everything, because everything we do is just managing data. I mean, you produce reports manipulating information into a certain format, but the format of financial reports or static reports people produce don't meet everybody's needs. So the question you have to do is be able to answer questions with data that's not a certain format. So I think that the transformation, the things we're talking about, it's about, you know, to me, the steps are going to be, you get the data and you get the IT modernization is going to change the business processes. Those business processes are going to change the technical skills and what we require of the workforce. And then the workforce changes are going to drive changes to the work environment, meaning how people expect to work, time, and stuff. So I think it goes from data to systems to process to people supporting that. So I'm interested in any questions you have and stuff, but I have a feeling that all the challenges that you have are pervasive across the government.
Well, thank you. You covered a lot of the first few questions we had, so we get to move pretty quickly right into talking a little bit more about the future. And as you all mentioned, you know, change is the new norm in many organizations, and particularly for the financial functions here. But because organizations do not often discuss the issues with one another, there's currently no clear vision of how finance is evolving. And to add to this, the global factors such as political uncertainty and sustainability concerns. So organizations everywhere are seeking to transform how we do business, and not surprisingly, our financial leaders, you're a vital part of that change. And we're looking for new ways to lead and train our teams. You all mentioned, and Tom, you mentioned balancing the challenges of funding the mission. So how will you make that happen? What will your organization need to look like in order to get towards a better balance of funding the mission challenges that you face?
Thanks. I think there's a couple things. When you look at the Coast Guard, we've been around for a bit. So we've been around for a little over 200 years. And when you start to look at where our stations are at, a lot of them are based upon us being stood up 200 years ago. And we slowly are trying to kind of get out of that model. Is there better ways to do things from when you were rowing a boat to a rescue and now you have a boat that can do 45 knots to make that same rescue? I think there is, but there's resistance not only from within the Coast Guard, but more importantly, externally, to how do we make that change. So my reason for kind of saying that is I think we have some external barriers that we're doing, but I think internally, there's a lot of things that we're doing right. Even at the CFO level, we have a CFO council breakfast, and I don't think Stacy ever puts out an agenda for it. And I think that's the great thing about it. We come there and we talk about our issues, and we talk about not only the things that are going wrong, but the things that are going right. And I think that's a great opportunity for us to kind of innovate and share and kind of get to where you were talking about, Tommy. I also think we've got to start doing business a little bit different. A few years ago, a couple decades ago, when we started talking about systems, everyone's system was tailor-made to the processes that they had inherent into their organizations. We got to change, right? We can no longer build systems based upon how we operate. We need to change how we operate based upon the commercially available systems that are out there. And I think when you start to look at that, those weren't put together in a hurry. Those business processes that are supported by those new systems, they're pretty good systems, processes. So I think that's where we got to go. So we've got to be willing to change, and I think for us in the Coast Guard, we also got to be able to kind of get to a new mindset. We are doing an innovation where we're taking and we are trying to pull purchase people from the field up to centrally managed areas. Sounds like it's very smart, it's very Amazon-like. You can't imagine the resistance we're getting from the field because we're changing their operating model, all right? But once you start to do that, once you take data, once you start to feed that data back in the system, all of a sudden we're starting to see a sea change where those people that we were taking their people away to begin with now have better service, can get things better, and this process is working. They're demanding that we take their people away. So that's where I want to be. So,
Well, that's great. And we all have this common mission, this common urgency towards the financial support. Are there any other differences in how you approach that problem with the other components? The funding of you're trying to figure out ways to better fund the mission and.
So, yeah, so for TSA, it's interesting because so much of our requirements and what we need to try to fund in the future is driven by external forces, like many agencies in the department. So, you know, the threat doesn't quit by the bad guys. They always want to try to get innovative ways to kind of get things into airplanes or wherever else the transportation systems might be. But on the same aspect, because we're pretty good at what we do, the passengers are continuing to fly and more folks are hitting the aircraft every day. And so those by themselves just drive changes that require additional dollars. And let's face it, you know, Chip coined the term a few years ago, flat is the new growth, I think. And so that's the fact. So when we have these emerging needs and we have a flat budget, and rightfully so, leadership who concentrates on the security operations, you know, we have to address that, but it also then means a lot of those other support organizations, like the CFO, like some of the others in management, will get squeezed because it's just hard to kind of go and defend a lot why, hey, we need to spend, you know, millions of more dollars on financial systems or database upgrades to support the back end when we're still struggling to kind of beat the threat and make sure that we have efficient operations. So the way we're doing that is, you know, we just kind of are getting real smart and real engaged with the leadership up front so we can develop a plan, a strategic plan that kind of forces us into thinking a few years out how we're going to fund all these things. And the more insight you have into the strategic vision and priorities of the administrator, the better you could plan for those you know, resource needs in the out years, especially, as I said, when they're flat, which flat doesn't do us any good, really.
So I'll jump on the strategic plan bandwagon. I would make a very safe bet that if you were to poll any FEMA employee here today, they could cite to you the 3 strategic goals that FEMA has laid out. So not only does this allow the agency to know where it's going and where to direct its resources, it also communicates to our external stakeholders what we will do and what we won't do. And it's been incredibly valuable because as an agency, we're laser focused on these three goals. One of which is reducing the complexity because we have the most financial systems out of any of the components here, and they're all roughly about 40 years old. And Jeff and Susie beat us over the head on a monthly basis about when are we going to fix our IT systems and remediate all the cybersecurity issues. But the fact of the matter is if we try to patch those, it would almost break the system. So we need to continue to reduce the complexity, which is modernize our IT systems to simplify, and where we can't do it internally, to partner with other program offices, other components, and other departments to help leverage that capability. What the strategic plan also helps us to do is identify the development and the skill sets that we need in our people. What are the critical skill sets that we need to be successful, given that flat is the new up, that we're not going to get any more people to stretch around the globe, because that's what our operational footprint is today. We're from Guam to Puerto Rico. If you look that up on a map, that's a lot of miles that we have to manage people and resources. So we just need to be strategic, and that strategic plan allows us to manage the risk and focus on what needs to be accomplished.
Well, thank you. And I noticed when Pat mentioned that flat is the new growth pattern, we got a chuckle from our OMB partner. And just a little, from your perspective at OMB, we're facing these challenges. How does it look from your perspective, and what type of advice do you have on that?
Well, if you read the federal financial statement, the sustainability model, it shows the federal finances in dire straits, right? Basically unsustainable. And so flat is lucky to be flat. Most likely you're going to see cuts. I mean, most of the budget's proposals were to cut departments 5% or more. But I think, the story is that the money, money has to go to mission. The reason all these agencies exist is to do certain missions. I mean, there were proposals around, even consolidating functions and reducing duplication. But that's where the savings are going to come from. I mean, it's applying less money. Doesn't mean cut everything 5%. Keep cutting capabilities. The Admiral mentioned risk. I mean, I think ERM is going to be a key piece because people are going to have to start, looking at performance versus compliance, using risk and being able to have a risk tolerance for some level of non-compliance or inability to do things at a certain level. Like you can't do 100% checks, you have to do certain type of sampling and things. So there has to be this understanding and be able to communicate that. And I think in the back office, the area is all about what the PMA, the CAP goals, and even in the CFO Council, the focus areas. It's around consolidation of systems, integration of data, within departments and across the government. Because, essentially, you talk about standards. It's standards across the federal government, not even. Most people built systems, tailored to their agencies. You can't do that. You can't even use government, commercial standards built to your agency is really not much different than building it again to the agency. So we're focused on is government-wide standards and then trying to get scale from contractors and industry to build systems that can handle multiple agencies. And the purpose of that's to drive out costs, drive out duplication, drive out manual labor that's costing money to just produce reports, to get auditable, to do compliance-based things, because from the mission standpoint, that stuff is not what your secretaries and people come in. They don't see themselves, I need 20% of my costs going into all this transaction processing. They're looking to say, how do you deliver as cheaply as possible? So I think that the assumption is it's going to be disproportionate cuts in the mission support areas in order to not drain it out of mission.
Well, you both, there's a few of you that keep mentioning data analytics or data-centric type decision-making, and that's that's a challenge we have to build to adjust for. How do you see us driving towards that change? What are the steps we need to take?
Me to take a crack?
I'm
Happy to do it because that's what we're talking about. So for like the standard systems, it starts with data standards. So you can't build government solutions without data standards. So even if you read the new memo that went on shared services, it talks about first step is centralized data. And then once you have standard data, you build solutions to do that. And then if you scale it up, it allows you to bring more technology in that leverages data. So I'll give you an example. Like we're talking, I don't know, people, improper payments, you think about that. So, I mean, I boil it down to an improper payments. It's basically if you get to two high-level categories, it's the entity or the person should not have got money, right? So it's identity verification. Then it's once you prove who you are, it's you prove that you're entitled to receive the amount you're entitled to receive. So the first step is this identity verification, which is pervasive across everything. So cyber and all that stuff more of the information is done not face to face. So your request for government benefits, your request to get into people's systems, is through the internet, through web. You don't do face to face. So that the cybersecurity and the entry into government systems to get government benefits has the same issue. So you get the challenge of government, benefits require you to do some proof who you are. And there's discussions, how do you do that? How do you prove who you are? And we're talking with industry, because it's the same challenge, right? To create a bank account, to get insurance, do any of that stuff. So there's an industry and government kind of solution to do identity verification. But then you get into questions about, like, in data-centric, you're saying who owns that data, right? Like, so, because you got laws from the 70s about privacy, about data matching, way outdated. I mean, we're trying to go to is things like, you verify who you are, through some verification, and then you prove, like you're entitled to certain things. So there's data sets and data matches that happen behind the scenes. And so the model starts going more towards that people have, we're trying to get to, you own your data. So you go back and say, I want to request, a benefit that's based on my income. You're approving a match against multiple data sources that then proves your income. So it changes the whole model of how we do it, because currently now an organization, to access anybody's system, everybody's trying to prove someone's identity through 100 different ways. So how much cost is in that system to try to do the same thing, basically the same thing, prove you're you, right? And why not have one way to do it? So that's the difference. That's that consolidation, centralizing, doing the same function the same way, using the same data.
Yeah, so let me add on to that too, and put like a resource face on that part too. So one of the benefits I see about financial systems modernization is that if we do it right, eventually we could all have the same coding structure, right? So same standard accounting string. We talked about that earlier today, how beneficial it was to go from 74 appropriations down to 4. So just picture then every component using the same kind of programming codes, right? So we have the same appropriation, we have the same kind of PPAs, at least they all target the same type of mission within DHS, and then with sub to that, we all have program elements that kind of help us drill down into, how much are we spending on environmental, how much are we spending on real estate, how much are we spending on training for the different type of training categories, and then you go into the mission. That's very similar, if you have a DoD background, you kind of know what I'm talking about. And so everyone kind of uses the same coding structure. So whether it's the headquarters looking out overall to DHS, or it's a component looking within, we all could kind of pull the same data out, and we all understand it the same, which is going to be huge, and I think a big benefit to it. In terms of data analytics, then real quick, so part of what we do is we'll pull the information from the system, right? But we got to make sure it doesn't stop there, which I think a lot of us will want to do. We spent money on these systems, we get a report out, and we're like, here's a report. And our job is, CFO types, whether you're in the budget or finance, is then to go that next step or two and then analyze the data, right? Because if we don't do it, trust me, our leadership isn't going to do it. And if someone outside CFO tries, more than likely they're going to get it wrong. And then it's going to put additional stress and pressure on us because we started going off in the wrong direction. So anyhow, so great benefit down the road to all this stuff. If we could get to a common coding structure, we're all on the same page, and we could look at it, and then we know what to analyze and do the analysis. And so we're just making better resource decisions.
Thanks.
The end.
The end. We talked a lot about the things that overcoming the challenges that we have and identifying the things that we want to drive in our vision in the future. What is the vision in the future going to feel like for the members of the audience? How would you describe it to them?
I think the vision in the future, I think very much will be the vision that we have today as a department, whether at the component level, at the overall departmental level. It's how we do our job will change, and that continuous growth, not only among the leadership, but everyone here today in the resource community needs to continue to grow and be that continuous learner, to grow past your core competencies and not be afraid to take on the new challenges that Chip talked about earlier, and not being afraid to fail and to take on and innovate new ways of doing your job today. I tell my team all the time that I don't want them to work harder, I want them to work smarter. I want them to leave every day at 5 o'clock. They shouldn't be sitting at their desks working on pivot tables. My hope and dream one day is I'll have a modernized financial system where we could just hit a button and the information comes out, and we can better utilize our time to do that analytics and understand what the numbers and the facts are telling us, and how we can really inform senior leaderships to make their best decisions. So that's my vision for the future.
So I'll lay some. I mean, I think the question is when you sit there, what are you doing with your time, right? And what's the value you add with that time? So that's the bottom line, is what's the value you put in that you're needed to put that value in. So if you think about it, and if your value is the only person in town who knows how to run a certain legacy system, or you're the guy that can do the pivot tables because no one else can,